Hello, welcome to Screencast 11 for Chapter 18. We are almost done. So, what's the problem with the US? Why aren't they signing these conventions, conferences, signing with the rest of the world? What is preventing our politicians from doing anything? The biggest thing is policymakers fear emission reductions will hurt the economy. That is the biggest thing that's out there. China and India also resist emission cuts. China, with its coal industry, most of the workers are within that coal industry. That's where its energy is coming from. So they're resisting. The economic vitality does not need higher emissions. That's just the main point. Germany has the third most technologically advanced economy in the world, and they've been able to cut their emissions by 25% between 1990 and 2010 and still maintain their economy. So we have to see that climate change, emissions, and economy go hand in hand. It's not going to be cost effective if we continue to let things run amok like they are right now. We're going to wind up putting more money out repairing from global disasters that have been created by the climate change, from extreme weather conditions, from droughts that are going to occur, from the ice melt and the sea level rise. And all of this is going to be making us spend more money than we're actually bringing in. On a person-to-person basis, other wealthy nations have standards of living that are comparable to the United States, and yet they emit greenhouse gases at less than half of the United States rates. U.S. are gluttons to our new technology and our resources. The future will belong to nations willing to develop new technologies and energy sources. We will no longer be the leading nation if we continue the way that we are. So here's solar panels that are being made. This is a new renewable energy technology. It's on track to surpass, this is happening in China, it's on track to surpass the United States as a leader in greenhouse energy. And they're producing these solar panels. The U.S. federal government is not taking action. They are leaving it to states and local governments. Over 1,000 mayors from all 50 states have signed the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. This agreement is to meet or beat the Kyoto Protocol guidelines. The states have set targets or mandates for alternative energy. California is leading, and Oregon is the next state that is leading. They're passing the Global Warming Solutions Act, and they've cut their emissions and are planning to cut their emissions by 25% by the year 2020. Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or the RGGI, was established in 2007, and 10 northeastern states set up a cap and trade program under this Regional Greenhouse Initiative. We have started market mechanisms like permit trading programs to try to harness the economic efficiency of the free market to achieve policy goals. Businesses have the flexibility in how they meet their goals. Polluters will choose how to cut their emissions, and they are given financial incentives to reduce them below the legally required level. So we have these incentive packages that are out there for people that are not meeting the emission regulations by the state. So in this particular graphic, when we have a cap and trade emissions trading system that harnesses the power of the market capitalism to achieve the goal of reducing emissions, this is what we see. Here's the cap. If the plant succeeds in cutting down the emissions, then they're going to wind up getting money. If plant B fails to cut the emissions, the money they would get would go to the plant that was able to reduce them, and that plant will then profit more. So this is an incentive package that they have. The approach of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative says that each state decides which polluting sources participate. Each state will set a cap on the total carbon dioxide emissions that it will allow, and it issues permits for those emissions. So industry would get permits and they would have to maintain those levels. Each state lowers its cap and lowers the amount of permits over time, so it gets harder to get the permits if you're not maintaining the emissions that you agree to. And then sources with too few permits must reduce emissions, buy permits from others, or pay for carbon offsets. So if you're not reducing your emissions, it's not going to be as cost effective because you're going to have to be putting out more money to get the permits and to pay for the carbon offsets, and then you're going to lose that income. Sources with too many permits are able to sell them. So if there's an industry that has acquired a lot of permits and they're being able to maintain their emissions, then they can sell their extra permits, and any source emitting more than permitted will be penalized. So there will be fines that will be given. The European Union Emissions Trading Scheme, this has the world's largest cap and trade program. The governments here have allocated too many permits, and the value of these permits have plummeted. So their incentive program did not work as effectively because they just had too many out there. They were too easy to get. And there was little incentive for the businesses to reduce the emissions. The Chicago Climate Exchange was the world's first emissions trading program for greenhouse gas reduction, and it worked to lower the cost of permits, and it caused the exchange to close in 2010 because it, again, just like with the Europeans, it just wasn't incentive enough for the businesses to do anything. So permits will only be valuable and exchanges will only work if government policies limit the emissions. So we've got to make these permits valuable to industry to have, and we have to put a limit, a cap on the emissions. Critics say that the cap and trade systems are not effective, and we can see why. So they've recommended a carbon tax where governments charge polluters a fee for each unit of greenhouse gases they emit. That's going to raise the price of the product that industry is making if they do not stay within that emissions cap. Polluters have a financial incentive to reduce the emissions. They'll make more money if they do. Roughly 20 nations have a carbon tax of some sort. Boulder, Colorado has a tax on electricity consumption. And again, but that's going to raise the cost of electricity. Montgomery County, Maryland taxes polluting power plants. So any plants that put out any sort of pollution, they will get taxed for that. Polluters pass cost on to the consumers, as I said. It's a fee and dividend approach in which the funds from the carbon tax are passed to the taxpayers as refunds and dividends. So you may be initially paying for the product, but then you have this dividend that you can get that is a refund that can be written off on your taxes. So the carbon offset right now is a voluntary payment intended to enable another entity to reduce the greenhouse emissions that one is unable to reduce by themselves. The payments offsets one's own emissions, and it's very popular among utilities, businesses, and universities, the bigger industries trying to achieve carbon neutrality. And what they're trying to do is have no net carbon that is being emitted. That's huge, and I don't know if it's really going to be attainable, but it's a goal. Carbon offsets do fall short. They need more rigorous oversight to make sure that the offset money accomplishes what it is intended for. So here you get the idea that we need more regulation to make sure that that money is going to be used to reduce the emissions. Carbon offsets can also help businesses become carbon neutral. We can find ways to reduce the carbon footprint. We all did that carbon footprint test, I believe, back in chapter 4. And we can see how much we're actually impacting. And there are ways that we can reduce energy consumption by emissions if we upgrade our buildings and our computers for energy efficiency. We reduce employee travel by using more video conferencing. If we eliminate 47% of the emissions by installing solar panels and wind turbines, that will impact the amount of carbon dioxide tremendously. The remaining 41% of the emissions were offset by funding preservation and replanting of the forests. So there's easy ways, and we can put money into the economy by making the solar panels, by building the turbines, by planting the forest. So there's ways to put money back to the economy for this. We may not be able to stop the severe global climate change that we're seeing, but geoengineering is one way that we can help. We can cool the climate by removing the carbon dioxide from the air, and we can put in ways of reflecting sunlight away from the earth by allowing the temperatures to cool and by allowing the ice to come back, the snow. Carbon dioxide can be removed by the air. Our biggest resource is planting trees and fertilizing the oceans. There's this idea of designing artificial trees that can chemically filter out carbon dioxide. And these artificial trees, so we need to find a way to suck the carbon dioxide out of the air. We could enhance photosynthesis in natural systems by planting trees, as we said, or increasing phytoplankton in the oceans. A high-tech method would be these artificial trees, which would be structures that could chemically filter the carbon dioxide from the air. Another thing would be to block the sunlight before it reaches the earth. This would cool the planet. We could do this by injecting sulfates or other fine dust particles into the stratosphere. It's called seeding the clouds. We could do this by seeding them with seawater, or we could deploy fleets of reflecting mirrors on land or at sea or in the orbit of space. All of this sounds interesting. But the potential methods could be daunting and could take decades to happen, and it may not affect climate change at all. It might cool it, but it will not reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is being put up into the atmosphere. So we see different ways. Here's ways of reflecting that sun back, our mirrors. I think that's kind of a funny solution when I see that. Or seeding the clouds with dust and seawater mist. What other problems is that going to create? And that's one of the things we look at. So what we can do is we can reduce our own carbon footprint. College students are helping to drive personal and societal changes needed to mitigate climate change. There's an International Day of Climate that happens. 181 nations are involved. Global climate change might be the biggest challenge that's facing you, our children, and it would be the biggest victory if we were able to halt that. All right, so I'm going to let you finish the conclusion on your own, and we are done this chapter. Have a good one.